Good morning. It's nice to see you all. Last week was insane for me. My middle daughter, I hate to miss. Let me just say that. Like, I absolutely hate missing one. Like, I love the content that we cover, so I'm sad to ever like not cover it. And I hate being behind, right? I'm such a like efficient person. But my middle daughter was violently ill, whether it was COVID or just sickness, who knows? Uh, my older daughter had to have emergency dental surgery where they put her under general anesthesia and yanked out two teeth from the top of her mouth. And then our like entire patio flooded from the rain. Like, so it's been fun. Anyone else have a have a fun week? Are you surviving the rain? Yeah. Yeah. Same.
Not a fun week.
Not a fun week. Oh my gosh. I hope that she's okay. Right. It's tough, right? Everything just kind of added up last week. So I'm so sorry to have missed. I hate that. Hopefully you watched the lecture video. I know it was like a year or two old, but I thought it would be better than having you cover it completely on your own. I did have one like really positive thing last week, and I have to share with you because it's so ridiculously cute. We adopted this little kitten who is like the tiniest thing ever. He's this like this big, so cute, right? He meows. He just follows us around the house and meows, but he looks like this. And then that, like, so cute, right? Right now it's either going to be Chowder. He's like white. Looks like he's got pepper on top, right? Or Noodle, Chowder or Noodle or Cheeto. I don't know. We'll see. Because he cost a bag of Cheetos. That's why I like Cheeto. But I had to share him with you because he's super cute. He was like the one like kind of nice thing last week. Otherwise, a very challenging week. So we'll move forward. And luckily, if you read through chapter 3, then we are all caught up and we can kind of resume and pick up our schedule today, which is nice. So a couple of things really quickly. Did everyone turn in the case study online about Bark? If you didn't, you can still turn it in to me because everything was so disrupted. I'll be a little flexible on that. So if you didn't turn in that chapter 2 case study, make sure you turn that in. The participation link was in the announcement or assignment. So you can find it on either spot here on Canvas. And then I'm going to collect that myth of mental illness thing from you. If you have that, I'll collect it now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I will show you. But really important, how many of you got all of my announcements and stuff on Canvas? Okay. If you didn't get them, make sure you set your notes. Make sure you set your notifications so that you do, so that you don't wake up early or don't miss like an assignment of some sort. But if you go to announcements over on the left, right? So I posted this that the class was canceled, and if you clicked on that, right, it had all of the instructions. That one there was nothing, but the other one, everything being canceled in the homework assignment and everything. So just make sure that you are getting those announcements. Does anyone have, if you have that, if you want to bring it up and turn it in? If you haven't turned it in, you can still turn it in on Canvas. If you want to pass them up, I can explode. No, you don't have to come all the way up. And if you don't have it with you, or you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll look at the announcements and we'll still collect it. You can still print it in through the end of the day today on Canvas, and that's totally fine. And if you have it and I didn't collect it, you can put it up here before you leave, or again, turn it in on Canvas. I wanted to give you kind of an interesting, Mark, yeah, that was a case study number 2. I can take that from you as well. I'll just take anything you want to do. Okay. So I thought that the article is really interesting, right? I don't want to spend too much time on it because we get to very excitingly jump into the disorders. We skipped chapter 3 in a sense. We were getting to the disorders faster. But I think it's a really interesting take on the idea of mental illness. It's a very old idea, but it's still a very popular idea. He wrote his book in the 1960s, but he did write an article a couple of years ago, kind of reiterating some of the same ideas, kind of proposing that mental illness is a myth. It's a very polar opposite perspective to the mainstream perspective we're covering. And I thought it would be a great opportunity for some like critical thinking and to view it in a different lens. So just as a quick like review, if you haven't turned in either the case study on Mark or the myth of mental illness, you can either email them to me or turn them in through their links here on Canvas just before the end of the day. Okay, then hopefully everyone is caught up. Wednesday is a campus-wide flex day. So that has nothing to do with me. It's you all get the day off and we have to sit here and listen to a presentation on sexual harassment and diversity, something related to equity and diversity. So I'm jealous of you. Sometimes they have good cookies. That's the only saving grace to these things, right? We'll see. But I'm going to write this up here. It is the campus-wide flex meeting. So none of your classes should be meeting, right? It's a day where all of you get the day off, but instructors are here for presentations. Yeah.
You know, like the library and theater rooms are gonna be open?
They're usually still open, right? I haven't seen anything posted that they won't be. So they should be open. There just shouldn't be any instruction campus-wide. The one last thing I want to mention, just to make sure that you're thinking about it, is that first part of the diagnosis paper is due next week. It's really short. It's like a paragraph. But what I want you to start thinking about is if you haven't already picked a character from like a TV show or a movie, make sure you think about it in the next couple of days. So that first part of the diagnosis paper is due on Monday on campus. Okay, so I'll remind you again on Monday, but all you need to do for that first part of the paper is pick a character and give me like a paragraph explaining why you're choosing that person, and then give me the information for the show. Doesn't have to be in any particular formatting, but let's say that you're choosing, we were watching Harry Potter last night. Somebody once wrote a paper about Harry Potter that he had delusional schizophrenia and that he made the entire thing up and had delusions of grandeur because he was tortured and abused living in a like a room under the stairs. Super creative. I'm not expecting that to always be the case, but it was a really creative paper. So let's say I wanted to choose Harry Potter. I would just give you a paragraph of like, I'm really interested in this character and here's why. And then I would give the information for the show. And that's literally it. It's only worth 10 points. But if you click on assignments over here on the left, you can see it's right here where it says diagnosis paper part 1. And the instructions are right here. So literally like it said about a page, it's probably about a paragraph, maybe a paragraph and a half. Should take you very like minimal time to do. And you can always change your character later, but obviously the sooner you commit to somebody, the less work you have to do by like going back and yeah.
So do you actually want one?
I would literally say like a formatting, as long as you have like a good like paragraph about your character and the citation information in any format. That's all I'm looking for now. How many of you have a character in mind? Yeah. Anyone want to share? Who are you thinking? Anyone have a? Yeah. Who are you thinking?
I think it's super from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Okay, I like it. All right. Anybody else? Yeah.
Roof and Euphoria.
Okay. I haven't seen that, but I've heard good things. Right. That it's good but intense.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sheldon from Young Sheldon.
Okay.
You guys were watching that.
Nice. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I like it. Anyone else? Yeah. Okay, nice. You don't have to share. I get to read them all. It can be a TV show, it can be a movie, it can be a book if you really want it to be, or even a video game. I've had kind of the variety of them. Just pick somebody that you have enough information about to like diagnose and spend some time thinking about. So again, start thinking about that. That is due on Monday. I'll remind you Monday and see if you have any other questions. But just wanted to kind of take care of that housekeeping stuff before we jump back in. Are there any questions about anything? I know a few of you came in a little late. Yeah.
So I had a weird case of that. I couldn't find it in the announcements on my computer. I could find it in the announcements on my phone, and I'm not sure why that was.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh, okay, yeah. Sure, so the myth of mental illness is participation number 3. So if you go to assignments over on the left, and then scroll down to participation number 3, you could turn it in there. Or you could always just email it to me if it won't let you for some reason. Yeah. Yeah, just anytime today is totally fine. And if you didn't turn in the case study about Mark, that's participation 2, I'll accept that at the end of the day as well. Just since I disrupted everything last week, I don't want any of you to hurt for that. So if you have either and you haven't turned them in, email them to me, upload them on participation 2 or 3. Just try to do it by the end of the day so we can kind of get caught back up and back in our rhythm. Anything else for now? We get to start the disorders today. That's exciting, right? Finally. So let me close this and we'll get to our slides. Okay. So over the last 3-4 weeks, right, we have talked about how we viewed mental illness in the past, what is normal versus abnormal. We went over all the different models of how we could explain abnormality. And then last week, hopefully you watched the lecture, read the book. We gathered all the symptoms and diagnosis stuff. And now we get to finally talk about those things, right? So what we'll do for the rest of the semester is we'll talk about different groups of disorders. We'll look at most of the big ones. What are the symptoms? What are some of the models that dictate what it's caused by? How do we then treat it? And we'll go over most of them. And then we end the semester with forensic psych, kind of a slightly different topic, which is also fun. We'll look at some famous serial killers and things like that. Something to look forward to or dread, depending. Most people tend to be interested in serial killers, so maybe look forward to. But for this chapter, we're going to look at anxiety. And that's the first group of disorders that we'll cover. And it is the most common group of disorders. By far, of all of the disorder groups, anxiety is the most common. A lot of people struggle with anxiety disorders, whether it's like a generalized anxiety or a phobia or something like panic disorder, OCD. There's a ton of disorders in this category, and we'll look at some of the big ones. And I hope I don't offend anyone with a picture, but I thought it was funny. Did I blow the candle out? I think I did. All right. So one thing I want to mention really quickly before we get into this, there's a very common psychology student phenomenon that is experienced when it comes to disorders, right? And I remember experiencing this on the other end, but it's super common that as we talk about these, you're going to be like, oh no, I have that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. I have 92 disorders or something like that, right? By the time we get through them, every single person has elements of every single disorder to some degree, okay? Only when it's impacting your life and interfering with your life in some way, or clinically significant, do we deem it to be a disorder. Now, it's totally possible that one of these disorders that we talk about fits you, right? Or somebody in your life. If that's the case, go look it up, find out a little bit more. But just know that as we go through them, if you're like, oh no, I have phobias, and I have OCD, and I have this, and I have that, and I have this, it's a very common thing to feel when you're covering these disorders. Very common psychology student phenomenon. There's also 2 criteria that are common to every single disorder. So I want to mention them once, and then I won't mention them again, because every single disorder has these 2 criteria. Okay, and the first one is that it has to cause clinically significant distress. Distress or impairment. So if someone is struggling with depression, it's clinically significant in the level of discomfort and distress and impact that it's having on their life. Anxiety, which we'll talk about today, it's significant. It's more than just average. It's interfering with your life in some way. It's meeting those Ds that we talked about in a sense, right? Those deviance and distress and dysfunction and all of that. The other one that's common to every single disorder is it cannot be due to a general medical condition or the use of a substance. This gets a little bit tricky when we talk about substances, right? So it cannot be due to a general medical condition, or we would deem it a medical condition and a medical disorder rather than a mental illness. And it cannot be due to the use of a substance. So somebody has anxiety because they're heavily abusing stimulants. It's not considered an anxiety disorder. It's considered a substance disorder that causes anxiety. So let's say that somebody is really struggling with things like addiction or things as a result of drug use. It's actually considered a substance disorder because the substance is the root of it. And we'll talk about that more when we get to that chapter. But just know that these are two criteria for every single disorder, right? It has to be clinically significant, and it cannot be due to a general medical condition or the use of a substance. And so just every single disorder has those same two criteria. And when we're talking about anxiety disorders, they're different than just anxiety. Every single person experiences anxiety. Every single one of you. It'd actually be abnormal if you didn't have anxiety. Like when you go to take an exam, you're anxious. Maybe you get anxious when you get on a flight, right? Or when you're driving, or when you are faced with like a spider or snake or whatever it might be. Anxiety is caused by something appropriate and identifiable, and it goes away with time. So if you're anxious about a test, you're anxious when you go to take it, or maybe a little before, but then it goes away, right? Maybe you're nervous about the first day of school, right? But then it goes away. So identifiable, appropriate, and passes with time. Anxiety disorders are when people have like extreme, debilitating, or unrealistic anxiety. You're so afraid to fly that you miss somebody's wedding because you wouldn't get on the plane. You're so terrified to speak in public that you can't get your degree because you won't take that speech class. Keep putting it off. And some of you just smiled at me. The speech class is the worst, right? I hated it too. Though I heard you can take it online now. That's so unfair. No, it's not any better, right? I would have killed to take it online. I hated the speech class. Not that you would maybe think that, but I hate public speaking. I know that sounds weird to say. But anxiety disorders are beyond normal and typical. So I'll share with you, the night before the first day of school, I'm so nervous and anxious. I don't sleep very well that night. I'm stressed, I'm anxious. Like, is the projector gonna work? Is my computer gonna work? How many people are gonna be in here? Will the power turn off? Will my pants fall off? I don't know, I can like go on. Like, I'm just worried and anxious about everything. And that's normal, right? But then after the first week and I've met all of you and like everything's been okay, my pants stayed on, right? Whatever. I let that go and I move on. If I had that level of anxiety before every class, that would be something different. Right? And maybe I wouldn't be in the right profession at that point, right? So there's kind of a difference between these two, and what we're going to focus on are the disorders, that debilitating, extreme, or unrealistic anxiety. So we're going to start with this one, GAD, or generalized anxiety disorder. Erase it. I always think in this unit, when we're talking about OCD, I should just keep erasing and see how long before somebody says something that would be a waste of time. So I didn't. But generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, is the first anxiety disorder. This is somebody who tends to be very neurotic, right? There's a lot of anxiety, but it's not attached to any one particular thing. It's generalized. It's everything. You're anxious about everything. And oftentimes, because you're so anxious about everything, it makes it very hard to relax and calm down. And there can be some physical correlates that come with it. So people have anxiety and worry about a variety of things. So it's not just one thing, it's kind of across circumstances and across events, and it has to last at least 6 months. So again, it's general, right? It's everything, it lasts at least 6 months, and then you have to have 3 or more of the following symptoms. And I'm abbreviating, I'm kind of shortening this, but I want to give you some of those specific symptoms. People are constantly on edge, or restless. On edge, everything sets you off, right? Because you're waiting for it to, right? You're constantly anxious. Every little thing is going to set you off. You get tired easily. And a huge part of that is you have poor sleep. Kind of like this guy laying here, right? Trying to sleep at night, right? Please don't let the ceiling fall on my head. Please don't let the power go out. Please don't, whatever, right? You're just worrying and worrying and worrying about everything. You have poor concentration. Because your mind is somewhere else, right? Your mind is distracted, worrying and anxious about everything. So you have a hard time concentrating on the things that are going on around you. Oftentimes people are irritable. Right? That level of anxiety causes you to be a little bit cranky and irritable. And again, you're distracted with all these concerns that you have. We could also add, you have a lot of muscle aches. Oftentimes when we're stressed, we like hold more tension, right? And that tension can cause your muscles to hurt, to be a little bit sore. You have difficulty sleeping, which I already wrote. See if I want to add anything else. Basically, you're worrying so much that it's affecting your ability to function. So you're affecting your ability to sleep, to get through things, to pay attention, to focus. And it's, again, not attached to one particular thing. I have a great example of this. It's from the Lemony Snicket movie, not the TV series, which my kids are like obsessed with. They've watched the TV series like 4 times. Like, I don't know why they keep watching it. But I have an example of this. Aunt Josephine really struggles with like generalized anxiety. And this clip, I think, is a really cool bit, right? Where it's everything. It's not one particular thing. It's everything in general. And again, this person is oftentimes like really high strung, right? They're on the edge, they're restless because they have so much anxiety that it's very hard to calm down. I saw this, no, that's not a sin either. My goodness, you must have worried yourself to death, right? So much worry and concern. Anyone have people in your life like this? Any like stories or comments or thoughts? Anyone in your life that constantly worried about every little thing at all? Yeah,
I'm not superstitious.
sure. We'll talk about superstitions a little more probably next time. Very related to OCD, which we'll talk about. But there's a lot of worry and concern behind superstitions as well, right? Anybody else? Yeah. Okay.
Doctor, he saw.
Okay. We'll talk about illness anxiety disorder, I think in the next chapter, which is people who struggle with like almost like hypochondriasis was the old name of it, being a hypochondriac, you know. Yeah, that definitely that sounds kind of like what's going on there, right? And so if we take both of those and put them together and then add more, we tend to get this. And with every disorder exists on a continuum. So some people have this in like a very mild way, and other people it can be very pronounced and severe, right? So kind of existing on that spectrum. And some of the big causes here, the biggest one is the cognitive perspective, that cognitive model that we talked about. People have like irrational assumptions about the world. They have poor thinking patterns that are causing them anxiety. So you're thinking and worrying and inaccurate or inappropriate beliefs are causing you to have anxiety about the world around you. People start to worry, and then they worry about the fact that they're worrying, which causes more worry, and it's called meta worrying. It just kind of goes in a circle where the more you worry about it, and it just goes and goes and goes. Right? So the idea here is that if we can change your assumptions, change the way you view things, then maybe we can reduce the amount of worrying and anxiety and make things better. So if you're worried that the ceiling's going to fall on your head in the middle of the night, let's like look at that, right? What are the odds that that will happen? Is that something that's worth worrying about? Like let's like kind of break it down and go through that, right? And kind of look at the validity of those concerns. So from a treatment perspective, we challenge those beliefs. We try to like attack them one at a time, which can take a long time if people have quite a few of them. But there's a type of therapy here called RET, or rational emotive therapy. And I love that he's smiling because this guy is like one of the most antagonistic theorists that like I've ever read about. he would just flat out tell you you were wrong, right? Like almost in a like demeaning like kind of way. Like, no, that's stupid. Like, why would you think that would happen? Let's change that, right? Very like aggressive of identifying and changing irrational assumptions. This guy's name is Albert Ellis. Very aggressive in that way. So like if you're laying there going like, well, the ceiling's going to fall on my head at night, he'd be like, well, why would that happen? Like, and look at that and like basically kind of call you dumb for feeling that way. And some people do well with that. Other people shut down with that kind of stuff. So again, kind of knowing what your preference would be. Yeah. Interesting.
And she said it was all vaccine COVID-19. And then COVID-19 happened and she started freaking out. And I had to call her.
Oh, that's funny, right? So yeah, you're like, I had a, right? And then you were completely right about it, right? And that's the tricky thing is if somebody has a legitimate concern, it's very difficult to like, you know, turn it around, right? If you have a fear of something and then it happens, it only reinforces what was there already. But and then having to calm them down as well is kind of funny. Any other thoughts here about like the worrying piece of it or anything with the cognitive side? Yeah. Here?
Yeah.
Tired easily. You get tired very easily. Mhm. So the other big thing that we see is there are some biological elements to this as well, right? So one of our neurotransmitters called GABA plays a big role here when it comes to things like GAD, right? Generalized anxiety. And GABA plays a big role in a lot of anxiety disorders, but having low levels of GABA can actually contribute to anxiety. And so there are some medications that people can consider to help them with GABA. Now, a lot of people will take one of these like benzodiazepine kind of drugs, which are things like Valium and Xanax, but they tend to make you very sleepy. So they're not always the best like long-term thing. So sometimes people will take like a different anti-anxiety or antidepressant kind of drug. But Valium and Xanax tend to be really helpful for people, especially when it comes to sleeping at night. Right? Very interesting drugs in a sense, very highly addictive. I don't know if you've ever seen these featured in movies, but it's always a pet peeve of mine. People will like pop a Xanax or a Valium and then instantly feel better. They take about 20 to 30 minutes to work. So that's more of like a placebo and expectation kind of thing. But oftentimes these drugs can really calm you down and make it easier for you to sleep. But very commonly abused. People will combine them with alcohol, which makes them very dangerous, but commonly prescribed to help people who have difficulty sleeping, right, because of anxiety. We can also learn to calm ourselves down through like relaxation training, deep breaths, yoga, right? Like any kind of like calming mindfulness sort of practice can be helpful. But there are some medications from this perspective that we might consider prescribing. Before I move on to the next one, any other like stories or comments or questions, anything else about GAD? Again, this one very general, and then we're going to go a little more specific. Okay. So now we'll talk about fears versus phobias. I guarantee that every single person in this room has something that you are maybe afraid of to some degree, right? Maybe it's a phobia, maybe it's just a fear, but fear is something that is really normal and adaptive. There are things that we should be afraid of, right? If you fall from a high enough height, you die, right? The wrong snake or spider or whatever bites you, it could kill you, right? So fear is adaptive. It's our nervous system's physiological and emotional response to a threat, something that can hurt us, right, in one way or another. So just like with anxiety, we all experience fear, and it can be protective, it can be adaptive, but it can also go too far, right? So when somebody has a fear of flying, for example, maybe it takes a lot for them to get on a plane. Like they won't just fly casually, but they'll go if it's like something important. Maybe they have to have a drink or like company or like an animal to help them along the way, but they'll endure it. It just might be a little difficult for them. If they have a phobia of flying, they might not get on an airplane no matter what, even if that costs them in some way, right? So phobias are intense, paralyzing fears of something that is excessive and unreasonable. And oftentimes when it's not your phobia, it's funny, but when it's yours, it's not funny at all, right? We tend to have this irrational, excessive fear, and it can literally be of anything, right? So it can be spiders, it could be heights, it could be confined spaces, it could be talking in public. There are so many different phobias. Your book has like a whole list of them, but you can literally have a phobia of anything. Again, a little bit different than just a fear. And I have a video I want to play for you that kind of talks a little bit about that. And it shows this woman named Jackie who's afraid of feathers, like a feather from a bird, right? And so there are some birds in here just in case like that's your phobia. But let me play this for you. I think it's a great introduction to phobias and what they look like. I do really love the way that they show you how it affects her when she sees a feather, like her heart rate just absolutely like shooting up, right? Her fear that you see, that is very typical of somebody who has a phobia. When you are exposed to something that terrifies you, you have an instant reaction. And even just thinking about something that you have a phobia of can be enough to give you some of that reaction as well. It's thought to be like 1 in 10 people have a phobia of something. In my experience, it's quite a bit higher than that. But it's thought to be about like 10% of people. And again, there are phobias of literally everything. But the idea here is that you have a significant and persistent fear of like a situation or an object. Right? So something in your environment, some thought, some item, some stimulus causes you to have a significant and persistent fear. When you're either with it or even anticipating it or thinking about it, has to be at least 6 months. And again, you see with every single disorder, there's like an amount of duration, right? There, it has to last. This can't be like a one-time thing. It has to last at least 6 months. And then there's a bunch of different like symptoms that people tend to experience. You have like a marked and out of proportion fear. I am absolutely terrified of spiders. Anyone else? Any other spider fears in here? One has it maybe, sort of, right? I have a crippling, like I would say phobia of spiders. Just thinking about spiders and like seeing one up there and thinking about it as we're talking about phobias, I've like checked my drink like 5 times to make sure there's not a spider in my water. Like I could feel it, like I'm terrified of spiders. And like not even always the scary ones. Like daddy long legs are one of my least favorite spiders. And they're like barely a spider. They're not dangerous. They're just big and like gross looking, right? But this building always has spiders in it. Like I bomb my office at least once a year, usually once a semester, just to get rid of them all. I know they're in there hiding somewhere, right? There was a tarantula last year that was like 2 doors away from my office. I kid you not, like I was like, I'm done. Burn the school down. Like I'm not coming back. I didn't know they were here. I'm never coming back again. I called maintenance and they say they came and picked it up. I should have watched because now I'm convinced it's in my office somewhere. Like I'd never seen it again, but I think about it. Like it's been over a year. I'm still thinking about that tarantula. Every time I show up in the morning, I'm like, no, we're good. Okay. And then I look in my office for it. Like again, it's out of proportion. And oftentimes when people have phobias, they know that it's unreasonable. They know that it's not like grounded in reality, but that's not enough to stop the fear, right? So it's out of proportion. Exposure causes an immediate anxiety response, immediate anxiety or fear response. Maybe even just thinking about it, right? So thinking about the item that scares you could be enough to cause that kind of like physiological response to occur. You tend to avoid it. You avoid anything that reminds you of the phobia, right? You won't go near it. If it's a spider, you avoid them as much as possible. Couple other things. Let's see, what else can I add here? You recognize that the fear is out of excessive and unreasonable, but you can't stop feeling it anyway. So you recognize that the fear is out of proportion, but you still continue to react. So like I said, for me, I have a really intense fear of spiders, right? There's something that scares me quite a bit. My partner is lizards, right? And we have a lot of like spiders and lizards in like Simi Valley. So we conquer and divide. If it's a spider in the house, she gets it. If it's a lizard in the house, I get it, right? And our kids just laugh at us, right? Because we're both terrified of the opposite one. Anyone in here have a phobia of something, or have someone in your life who has a phobia you want to share? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I used to do
Sure. Yeah, and sometimes these do kind of just like decay over time, and just kind of fall away. Okay, that's great. Right, thank you. Or not great, but thank you for sharing. Yeah. Did you have your hand up too? Yeah. Oh, no, sorry.
When I was younger, I basically had a crippling fear of any insects,
Okay.
spiders, the like. And I don't have this anymore. The reason I think why is because my dad basically said, okay, it's getting out of hand. And basically put me into like not official therapy, but his own version of exposure therapy.
Oh.
Like, you're gonna go out in the garden with your mom
Mhm.
and just interact with the bugs.
Sure.
there. So I got over it through some
Exposure.
loose exposure therapy.
I like
but
that.
I did have this crippling fear of things.
Okay, better now.
Much, I love bugs.
Okay, interesting. So it was successful, the like mock exposure therapy. I like it. Yeah. Caterpillars, okay, right?
Like my friends used to like make fun of me. They would, she knows that after 21, she changed my lock screen to a caterpillar.
That's okay, not sorry.
I was like,
Uh-huh. Well, that's awful, right? Okay, caterpillars, right? And that's right, again, where we get at like daddy long legs aren't dangerous, but you're acting like they could kill you. Caterpillars, not dangerous, but awful, right? When it's your phobia, it's not funny. When it's someone else's, it can be funny, right? Yeah.
since I was like preschool age, I've had a severe fear of
Okay,
like to the point where I can't eat like certain foods because I'm scared it'll like make
make you throw up.
Yeah, and if someone like around me has like the stomach flu, I'll like take like extreme steps to it.
Okay, interesting. Other people, I think you had your hand up, yeah?
Needles.
Needles,
Yeah,
that's a pretty common one.
yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting. That's not uncommon. They always ask you that before you get your blood drawn, right? Because people do faint pretty frequently.
He thinks.
Okay, but not even himself, but
No, yeah, if this is us getting like,
Yeah.
this is the, yeah, he'll think.
okay. Yeah.
So specifically injection needles, I have tattoos,
Mhm.
but it actually started when I was a lot younger. I went to an appointment, I thought was with my cousin,
Yeah.
and he cried because of the needle, and I was like 3 at the time. And I attacked the doctor because he started crying.
Okay.
But ever since that day, I've had a phobia.
Interesting.
More than I didn't have a problem
Mhm.
until I went to that.
Okay, right, and we can oftentimes pick these up from watching things that other people go through, right? There's a few rare stain. Anyone else? Other phobias? Yeah. Clowns, yeah. It didn't do any favors for that, I don't think, right? A lot of phobias, and we'll talk about causes in a minute, are like cultural, right? And so you get like a wave of people who are terrified of Chucky or terrified of clowns or disease, right? Right now, like illness and germs and disease, huge phobia because of COVID, right? And so you get these interesting like waves of that. The #1 horror movie of all time is Jaws, because of the number of fears of the ocean it inspired. A lot of people are afraid of deep water and the ocean because of things like Jaws, right? So you get these things all the time. My family is so mean to me about my spider phobia. My mother-in-law specifically, back to my poor mother-in-law, right? My mother-in-law, I pick on her all the time, but she used to put spiders up the lampshades and in my shoes, like the little fake plastic spiders. If you've ever seen the movie Arachnophobia, it was like everything in that movie that like scared me as a kid. She put them in my cereal boxes. She put them up my lampshades. I feel really bad admitting this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. She got so bad with this that I waited for my moment. Her fear is possession. She's afraid of possession. And I was like, ooh, I can work with that. So I asked her to stop so many times and she just thought it was funny and just kept laughing. So I waited and waited and waited. And this was years ago. And she came to visit once without my father-in-law. And I was like, this is my moment. And it was right after like the Paranormal Activity movies came out. So again, like it's been a bit. But I waited. I got in so much trouble for this with my partner, but it was worth it. Like worth it. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. So I waited till she fell asleep. And then I went and stood in her room over her bed and just stood there and stared at her. And she didn't wake up forever. So I started making like this meme, right? And I started making some noises so she would wake up. And then she woke up and I was literally just staring at her, like rocking back and forth. She fell out of bed, peed herself, and never did the spiders again. So in my head, I consider it a great victory. I was on the couch for like a week, but like it was worth it. I didn't care. I was so proud of myself for that moment. Because that was her phobia. Again, when it's your phobia, it's terrifying, right? But when it's somebody else's, it can be comical. So no more spiders up my lampshades and in my shoes. So again, I got in a lot of trouble for that one. Oh, so worth it though, so worth it. Yeah, sure.
Our flight fight response doesn't react at all.
I mean, some people live in a state of like hypo or hyper arousal, and so they might not react as much. There's also other things like freeze or fawn. There's a bunch of different Fs that they've added. So, I mean, if you don't have a phobia of something, you're not going to react that way. But most people do have some kind of response. It's actually one of like the core criteria, even if it's like a freeze response or a runaway. It can present in different ways, but you have some kind of immediate instant response is like the core of the disorder, whether it's freezing or running away or whatnot. Any other phobias or thoughts? Yes. No, I don't mind. Okay, so when you freeze, obviously, like you hold still, fight, you would like do something to combat it, run away or flight. And then fawn is oftentimes when you do something to like minimize the response through your actions, right? So it might be that you like overachieve in terms of trying to protect yourself in some way, or you act in a way to try and counter it toward another person. So it's just a different presentation of like the fight, flight response. They've added like freeze and fawn and a bunch of other Fs as we learn more about how people's nervous systems tend to respond to long-term phobias and threats. Really interesting. We'll talk about it a little bit more when we get to CPTSD and stuff in the next chapter. So again, you can have a phobia of anything. I wrote a few of them up here. Social anxiety disorder used to be called social phobia, but it was so common and so big that they actually gave it a different name. So social anxiety disorder is when people have any kind of fear of performing in front of other people, talking or eating in front of other people. But you can literally have a phobia of just about anything. And as we've talked about, like these are often caused by something that happened in your life. It could be that you watched a movie way too young that scared you, right? Very, very common culturally. It can be that you had a bad event, right, that happened in your life. I remember very like vaguely, but when I was in preschool, I got locked in a bathroom that was filled with daddy long leg spiders. And that's why in my mind, I think I'm so terrified specifically of that type of spider, right? So, I mean, I don't like any spiders, but those spiders specifically scare me like really badly. And I think it's because I had that incident when I was like 3 or 4. And so oftentimes these are things that happen at a young age when you don't quite have the cognitive capacity to like recognize the threat versus like lack of threat. But conditioning, when two things become associated, you see somebody else go through it or watch a movie of something. Certain fears are more common than others because they tend to be dangerous already, like heights, and snakes and spiders and things like that. So there's often a very behavioral component to phobias, and that really shapes how we treat them. Because we think they're caused by exposures and conditioning, a lot of our treatments are aimed at exposing and conditioning in a different direction. Kind of like you were talking about with the insects in the garden, but a little more formalized. Right, so very common to take these and try and use them to shape the way that we treat those disorders. And I imagine a lot of you who have phobias, if you think back, maybe you can even think of when it started, right? It's very common for people to identify that moment when that phobia was created, especially if you kind of dig at it a little bit. So there's a lot of ways that you can treat phobias. The two biggest ones are exposure treatments. When people have a fear of something, we expose them to it in a couple of different ways, and it's thought to help, right? One of them, systematic desensitization, is very slow and gradual and like tends to be pretty successful, but it takes a long time. Versus flooding is very fast and dramatic, can be very successful, but it's also incredibly intense, and there can be some issues with it. So when we systematically desensitize someone, you create like a fear hierarchy. Like, so if we go with spiders, right, maybe like a picture of a spider is like my lowest fear item. And my highest one would be holding or handling like a live spider. And so what you would do is start with the lowest one, and then you would rate like on a scale of 0 to 100, how anxious are you? And then you calm yourself down and you deep breathe and you condition like relaxation stuff. And then you expose yourself to it again. And once you can handle a picture of a spider, then you go to a video of a spider or toy spider. Like you move up your hierarchy systematically, one step at a time. And again, it takes a long time to do, but it can be really successful. Flooding is the complete opposite. Flooding, if you are afraid of something, we give you a massive head-on exposure to it in as dramatic of a fashion as we can. And the thought is that if you can handle the dramatic, massive exposure, that a smaller, normal one won't scare you anymore. So I don't know, with spiders, would that be like Fear Factor style that you like lay in a tank of them or like you let them crawl all over you? I'd die. I know I would. I'd have a heart attack. That'd be the end of me. Or maybe with heights, they take you to the top of the tallest building. You can find, right? I had a student years ago at this point who was terrified of heights, and she flooded herself by going skydiving. She went skydiving and she said she screamed and she cried, and the guy had to like throw her out because they tandem jump, like throw them out the window. She's like, I tipped him really well because I was awful. And then she did this again and again and again until it didn't scare her anymore. Kind of like what your parents did if you're going out in the garden, right? It doesn't have to be harsh, but you're facing it head on with the hope that it will help you. And you can do this on your own, but it isn't, bad to have a therapist along for the ride if that's the case, because this can be very difficult to do, very emotional to do. And I have a clip of flooding that I'd like to play for you. It's a guy who's afraid of heights. And so rather than systematically working up to it, they take him to the top of the tallest building they can find. He cries, he swears, you can see his face is all red, but then he starts to calm down. And that's the idea behind flooding, that a massive exposure, you are okay. And at some point, your body has to calm down because you don't have any more energy to commit to it. So let me play that chin, right? She's able to pick up that feather, right? Just sitting with that fear. Sometimes we call that like titration, where you titrate up to something. So you expose someone and then you back off. Expose someone and then back off. And the idea is that you start to build up new connections in your brain. You're changing the associations that your brain has with whatever it is that scared you, and trying to kind of reverse and condition it in a different direction. And so these are two of the very common ways that we do that. That clip is kind of like a blending of the two. But if you were given a choice, if you had to pick one, give you two choices, right? If you'd rather face your fear slowly and systematically or face it head on, right? How many of you would pick to do the systematic desensitization by show of hands? Right? Maybe a good number of you. How about the flooding? rip that Band-Aid off, right? A lot of you, that's great. And again, you can do these things on your own. Every now and then, I feel like I get the like motivation to do them on my own with spiders. Like, again, there's spiders in this building all the time. I think it was not last week, because it wasn't here. The week before, there was this giant, daddy long leg spider in the office downstairs. And I was like, I'm gonna touch it. I'm told I got this. I'm gonna touch it. I walked in, I was like, I got this. I'm gonna nope. And then I walked right out. But I thought about it, right? And I'm like, even just looking at that, I'm like, I could totally touch that picture if I wanted to, which I don't. But like, even just thinking about it gives you anxiety. Touch it, right? Like, my palms got sweaty, but I could touch it. So it's that kind of stuff, though. Like, if you change those connections and face those fears, you can completely get rid of them on your own or with help. Yeah.
If the thing you're afraid of.
Yeah.
I remember in Hawaii, I did once swim.
Mhm.
Or swept into the shore.
Yeah.
And then my father's like, you go on water. Then, you know, you swim on me, well, stung by the jellyfish and have big feet.
Yeah. Right. And that doesn't help, right?
So was it kind of like a training area?
It is, because there are, like I told you, I'm terrified of spiders, right? You get bit by the wrong spider, it could kill you, right? So it's healthy to have some fear of spiders, but not necessarily, bless you, healthy to have a fear of daddy long legs, right? So it's the way that you respond and how general it is. As a side note, this is really like ironically unfair. I got bit by a brown recluse spider and almost lost my foot. I would love to say that that's what caused my phobia, but I got bit when I was like 19, and I think my phobia started when I was 3. I went camping in the Utah desert, and I was the first person in the recorded history of the Utah desert to be bit by a brown recluse spider. Lucky me, right? Had to have 3 surgeries. I have a gnarly, huge scar on my foot, almost lost my foot. And even then, right? I'd love to say that started it, but no, right? So like some spiders, deadly, super dangerous, like a black widow, you want to have like a healthy amount of fear of. So it does become a little bit of a gray area when it is actually threatening and dangerous, but it's the way that you respond and how long it persists that makes it like a phobia versus a normal fear. But it is a gray area. Yeah.
So how would you describe the difference in how it feels for you with your phobia by spiders and how it feels for someone who doesn't have a phobia of spiders?
Sure. So how do, like, somebody in here who doesn't have a fear of spiders, if you saw a daddy long legs, how do you feel about it? Yeah.
It could start with like, oh, for a second, and then I'm very quickly calm, like, oh, it's a spider. I know consciously it can't hurt me.
Okay.
Subconsciously, I'm terribly frightened.
Yeah.
I must have calmed.
Okay. Anyone else? Like reaction if you saw like a spider like that? Yeah.
Why pick up?
You're
crazy.
crazy. Yeah. Amongst me. Okay, so like you notice it, you might pick it up and like take it somewhere else. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I was so hot dog.
Yeah. See, if I found a spider in my bed, I would strip the entire bed, wash everything, and then I would probably have dreams about it that night that it was still in me. And that's where like the difference comes, right? And so it's like somebody who has a phobia, you might avoid that bed now, burn the bed, get rid of it, right? Or at least like I would strip everything, wash the sheets versus you walked away like, yeah, right? So not a big deal, right? Or like even considering like taking it out. I once dropped a class in college because there were so many spiders in the classroom, right? I couldn't handle it. It was a European history class. I liked the teacher, really cool guy, but there were so many spiders in there that I couldn't hear a single word that he had to say, right? And then he would make fun of me on exams. He added questions on the exams about spiders because I talked to him about it. I was like, I want to stay in here, but there are so many spiders in this room. I'm afraid, you know? And then he would add the questions on the exam. A student's so scared that they don't remember their history questions. I was like, he's making fun of me. And I had to drop the class. So it's a severity difference, right? Between, you know, maybe you don't like spiders, but it doesn't cause you to avoid or have that intense reaction. And again, some spiders are dangerous, right? So much about spiders today, right? Too much about spiders. My cousin, we didn't get to do this because I didn't see you last week. But normally when I give out this like Oreo personality test as part of the assessment chapter, and I won't eat Oreos anymore Because my cousin 10, 15 years ago took an Oreo, smashed a dead spider into it, and then gave the Oreo to me without telling me. So when I went to open it, luckily for me, I like to eat Oreos, but I like twist it and open it and eat the like filling first. But I twisted it, opened it, and there was a dead spider in it, and I won't eat Oreos anymore. Right? I lost the sad thing about it. I love Oreos, but not anymore. I won't eat them because I'm convinced there are spiders in them, right? Damn cousin, right? I hope she gets whatever is coming to her. I need to stand over her bed so she falls off. Anyway, so I'll stop here, and then next time we'll pick up with panic attacks and OCD and a few things. Quick reminder, to remember Wednesday, Campus White Flex Day, so I won't see you. There's no assignments or anything because it's just a day where there's no instruction. Don't forget, if you haven't given me the mental illness or the case study, you can hand it to me here, you can email it to me or turn it in on Canvas. And then when I see you next, we'll keep going with more anxiety. So enjoy the rest of the rain. Have a wonderful day and week. I'll see you next time. Bye.